Okay, so part 2 of the table creation process is to create a leg. We're only going to create one table leg. Why? Because why would you create 4 and then have to texture all 4? Let's create one, texture that one, and then duplicate it 3 times and move it around into place. Okay, so again, we're going to create a box. And I'm going to just scale it down to the middle. Oh, it flipped it already. I'm going to scale it up pretty big here. So it's just about playing with the manipulators and getting it right. And in the end, I'll sort of check to see. That looks like a pretty big leg. Let's make it a little bit smaller all the way around. And a little bit taller. We want to extend up and through, if possible. Up and through the table. And then we're going to go to, again, orbit around to the top view. So it turns into orthographic view. And I'm going to hit Z. And as you can see when I do that, it turns my leg. It changes the shading mode on my leg, but not the whole scene. Again, which is a difference than Maya. Maya, you can't do, you have to do one or the other. You can't do all of, or you can only do all of it at the same time. You can't do it based on the object. So what I want to do is I want to be able to see through my table. So again, I'm going to hit Z to get to wireframe, and then I'm going to select my box 1 again, which another interesting note, when I created that, it created the object above the other one, when a lot of programs create it below. So again, I'm going to go to top down, and I'm going to turn snap to grid on, and I'm going to move the object to the bottom right grid that's inside of the table, and then I'm going to rotate out. Before we forget, and again, I'm going to hit Z to get the shaded mode. I'm going to select that one, hit Z to get the shaded mode. Before we forget, we want to take these segments down for each one to 1. Because when we start texturing, we don't want to have to deal with too much geometry. We want to keep it as simple as possible. Okay, so now we have a leg. And again, we will texture that leg separately. And then we'll duplicate it and move it around. Okay, now we're going to get into how to texture this table. We're going to start with the tabletop. The first thing we need to do is we need to convert it to geometry. So we can click the Convert to Geometry button, and you can see it changes from a box shape to a box baked object. You can also rename these if you want. Table, top, tip top, top, tabletop. But what we have to do is we have to break all of the sides apart. Okay, so we're going to create 3 new objects basically, because we are not able to texture faces in this. So separate faces we cannot texture in Vectary. So it becomes, to me, a much more difficult not being able to have a UV editor and be able to project, planar project onto faces. We have to do it onto these baked objects. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, it's a little bit tricky. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to edit mode, and we're going to have to remove the sides, because the front side of the table and the back side of the table are facing the same direction. In other words, they're facing Y, in the Y direction, right? We can still planar map, but they're sharing the same plane for the planar map. So we can break them apart separately. And then we're going to take the ends apart, and then we'll have the top and bottom of the table remaining. Okay, so let's go to Edit and select by face. Okay, hotkeys, by the way, they have those too, but I just don't use them yet. So I'm going to select the front. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to select the back. And then I'm going to hit Cut. So Control X, and you'll see they're cut out of there. Now, if I were to paste this back in, it would again attach it to the table. It'll attach it to what we have selected. So this is where that empty node comes in. I'm going to create a new object. And now I'm going to Control V and paste, and you'll see these faces now belong to new object, which I can name table front back. All right, so now we have to go back to tabletop, go to select by face, and I'm going to select the left side and the right side. And I'm going to cut again. I'm going to create another empty node. And I'm going to paste again. We're going to call this table sides. All right, so now we have three separate objects. If I get out of object mode, you'll see that we have these three separate objects. Top and bottom, front, back, side to side. Also notice when I toggle through these, the three parts of our table, that our material changes. So it's like when something's automatically created, or we create a new empty node and paste faces to it, a new material is created. So you'll see that that changes. All right, and that's important because now we're going to go in and we're going to try to texture this thing. So let's do the top and bottom first. Because it has its own material to it, we can simply go into our color, and we go into this caret here and go upload own, and I've given you the Vectary Table Parley 01 texture. So I'm going to open that, and you can see that it stretches out to the sides of the texture. So it should be top and bottom. Yeah, there we go. Excuse me. Now while we're here, we might as well go down and get our normal map. And we can adjust some of the settings later. So now we have our normal map. The problem is we have this little section in that texture that I created that's actually supposed to be textured to the legs. So we want to stretch this texture out, but we have no UVs. There's no way to do that. There's no setting in here that you can scale. If I start scaling, it's actually going to scale the geometry, and we don't want to do that. So, and what we have to do is go up to UV projections. So in this little group, go to UV projections, and you'll see that the default over here in UV projection is box. We want to change that to plane, and you'll see now you have to check and see which direction is this thing. Is it projecting? Which direction is it projecting? So we have what we want. You would see very quickly in that texture if it wasn't what we wanted. And now it gets a little bit tricky where we have to scale our projection up and down, which we can with the manipulator. So I want to scale it. Oh, it's doing our geometry again. I have to grab our UV projection, and let's see. I thought that would scale our UV. Let's see, scale. What happens if we do this? It's going to be the geometry again. Yep. So yeah, that's one thing I forgot. So when we want to scale our projection, basically our UVs, we have to again go to edit mode. And then now you can actually see the manipulator move. We can play with squashing and stretching our texture. I'm going to squash it a little bit in this direction so that the edges meet up. And then if we want to, this should be repeated, but let's just play with it and see what happens. We're going to start stretching it, and then we're going to see lines there and repeated textures. So I'm just going to leave it at the default where it was, and that'll be okay. So both, when you did that, it worked on the top and bottom, and now you have to use that same idea on the other one. So let's do front and back. Let's go to back to object. We have our own material. Let's map the table to it. And while we're here, again, why not map our normal if we have a normal map? So we're going to map the normal. And then you can see this is really, really quite messy. I'm going to scroll up. Again, we want to make sure that we get our UV. So now we have to go to UV projections. It's going to assign a UV projection to us. It's also going to be a box. I always like to work in plane. And the problem is now it created the same directional Z projection. The map was going up and down. That's why we see streaks there. So we have to go to edit, and we have to rotate this guy. And sometimes it takes some working to do. If you hold down Shift when you rotate, it'll lock every 15 degrees. So let's hold down Shift and get it to 90 degrees. Let's take a look at what we have. It's actually not bad. I think that'll work. So I'm going to click out of there. And now we're going to get the sides. Once again, I don't know where all of our stuff went. Oh, we're in object. We got to go back to object mode, go assign a texture. Boom, open, get our normal map, upload, open. And again, we're looking at it, and it's not good the way it looks. So again, we have to project, UV projections. And again, it's a box. I'm going to change it to plane. And again, we have to rotate that. So we have to go to edit, and we got to rotate it in this direction. And I'm going to hold down shift until it gets to 90 degrees. We should have a bunch of lines here. That could be desirable. Unfortunately, the other thing I don't like about Vectary is when we're doing this, it hides our textures for our other geometry. We can always get back and look how it created this UV projection node if we want to manipulate that. I'm going to click off of this and go back to objects so we can see everything. And the problem with this is the way the side is done is these lines don't match up. You can play all day and try to get those lines matched up, but to me it's very difficult. So I'm going to go back to this UV projection, and I am going to, let's see, rotate it in this direction here, I believe, to get those lines to go side to side. Oops, I forgot to go to edit. There we go, edit, until we get to, once again, 90 degrees. And there we have sort of more of a solid piece of wood. And I'm just going to click off so we can see the whole thing. And that'll work as far as very, very, very simple polygon modeling and texturing for our table. In the next video, we're going to talk about doing the leg.